Good afternoon and welcome to Frequently Asked Fridays. My name is John Bonina. Today we will be discussing the issue of sexual abuse in our schools. Uh, the most important thing to any parent when they send their child to school is that their child be safe. Yes, you want them to grow, learn, and be nurtured, but the number one concern is, will my child be safe? Parents have an absolute right to expect that their children will be safe at school, and schools have a legal duty to make sure those children are safe and free from abuse. Now, the law recognizes this in how it defines that legal duty that schools owe to their students. The school and all schools are expected to act as a reasonably prudent parent. So, in an ordinary negligence case, if a reasonably prudent parent would not force their slender daughter to wrestle a bigger, stronger boy against her will, that can result in the imposition of liability if an injury occurs. And a number of years ago here in Brooklyn, that exact scenario did result in the imposition of liability in a case which I tried through to verdict on behalf of our client. Uh, in the context of sexual abuse in schools, if, for example, with respect to that reasonably prudent parent standard, if a parent would not allow their teenage daughter to be alone in a room with a 35-year-old man with the doors locked so no one could come in and the shades drawn so no one could see in, that can result in liability. And that should be setting off alarm bells at the school as to what exactly is going on in there, as it would for any reasonably prudent parent. Now, there are many legal theories that can be used to impose liability when a child is assaulted or molested in school. These include what's called breach of the duty of a reasonably prudent parent, which we have discussed already. Negligent supervision of the students, not just your student, but the other students, and negligent hiring, retention, training, direction, and supervision of the school staff. Today we're going to discuss each of these and examples of how things can go wrong when the school does not adhere to the legal duty it owes to you and to your child. We've already briefly discussed the reasonably prudent parent standard. Simply put, no reasonable parent is going to allow their teenage daughter, for example, to be alone in a room with a 35-year-old man with the doors locked and the shades drawn. And yet we've seen that scenario time and again, not just in the 1970s and 1980s in cases which have been revived under the Child Victims Act. We saw that very recently, unfortunately, at a school in Westchester County where one of our clients was abused by a teacher who did exactly that, locked the door, drew the shades, and sexually abused her. And it's a sad and unfortunate situation when you're trusting your child and you're trusting your child's safety when you hand them off to the school for the day and the school just does not keep them safe and does not protect them from predators like that. Now, many school districts and their insurance companies take the position that they cannot be held liable, they can't be responsible unless they had actual notice of the abuse. First, that's not completely accurate and it only tells part of the story. Secondly, proving notice includes not just actual notice, but also something known as constructive notice. Now we'll talk about both of those things. With respect to actual notice, it's not every case that a school is told about someone being a sexual abuser, a sexual predator, and they do nothing and allow it to continue. Yet we have seen that in several cases. Historically, back in the 70s and 80s, we represent a number of men who were sexually abused by a volunteer in the school soccer program. And that volunteer With respect to that volunteer, two brothers in the very early 1970s went to the powers that be in that school, told them about what was going on, and the school chose to do nothing. And unfortunately, that predator was allowed to continue to operate in that school and in their programs, and dozens of boys paid the price over the next decade and a half. It doesn't just happen, actual notice, with teachers and staff who are abusive. It happens with other children who may be problem students as well. So more recently, and I'm talking about very recently, like in the last month or two, a number of kindergartners and grade school students were sexually assaulted and abused on their school bus by an older student. Now, that older student was a troubled young man, and he had had previous complaints about him, specifically with respect to sexual abuse at the school. And in fact, another student already had an order of protection against this young man, and the school had mandated that he have a one-to-one paraprofessional with him at all times. They just didn't enforce that. They didn't have the paraprofessional with him on the school bus when he was exposed to, literally and figuratively exposed to, young grade school children and kindergartners. In that case, not only did they have actual notice of the sexually abusive tendencies of this young man, they also didn't properly supervise this teen who was known to be sexually abusive, and didn't properly supervise the young students on the bus who were being forced to mix with this person on the school bus. And that, I assure you, will result in the imposition of liability against that school district. Now, there's also the issue of constructive notice. Actual notice is when they knew about the abuse or the propensity of that perpetrator to commit sexual abuse. Constructive notice means that they should have known. So, for example, going back to the first example I gave, when a teacher's alone in a room with a student and draws the shades so no one can see in and locks the doors so no one can come in and interrupt what he is about to do, the school should know something is going on, or at least begin to ask questions. When a teacher leaves school in the middle of the day with a grade school or middle school student over and over and over again, and that student's missing classes, and the teacher is leaving to be alone with that student during the school day, the school should know that something is going on, or again, at least begin to ask questions. After all, as parents, we want and have the right to expect that our children will be safe in school, and the school's expected to act with the same degree of caution as we would. Now, the last area I want to talk about is negligent hiring, retention, training, direction, and supervision. So the negligent hiring and retention deals with whether the person is employed in the first instance or kept on, and the negligent training, direction, and supervision is literally the instruction that the school gives to those teachers or staff, and the oversight they give to their teachers and staff, specifically in this context, in their interaction with children. So when a teacher's been fired, for example, from multiple previous jobs, and the school A doesn't find out why, and B doesn't supervise that teacher to make sure they're acting appropriately around the students, that can and should result in the imposition of liability against the school if that teacher sexually assaults a child. And when a school employee has multiple previous convictions, including convictions for sexual assault and rape of a child, that person simply has no place in a school and no place around your child. Yet that's exactly what we've seen in certain New York City schools historically, decades ago, and in other schools in New York State more recently. So the question becomes, what exactly is going on when sexual predators are permitted to roam the hallways and the classrooms and have unfettered access to your child? That is wrong, that is reprehensible, and that is something that we are here to make sure never happens again and does not happen to your child. The bottom line is this: your child's school has an absolute obligation to supervise your child, to supervise the other students, and to supervise the teachers that they interact with, and an absolute obligation to make sure that your child is safe when you entrust your child to that school. And the school has an absolute obligation to keep your child and other children safe from predator teachers and safe from fellow troubled students. Sadly, this doesn't always happen. And if you're concerned about your child's safety or a situation that has arisen at your child's school, please feel free to call us. We're happy to answer your questions. We're here for you. This is what we do. Please join us next week on Frequently Asked Fridays, at which time Erin Peak will be discussing the next level of sexual assault in schools, sexual assault and abuse in higher education. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a pleasant day